Dr. Richard Oppenlander is an internationally uh, sought after speaker. He spoke for the European Parliament. Just adore his family. They have a farm. They have a farm sanctuary because they love animals like I do. And Richard also works on world hunger projects. Um, and he has a organic plant-based production company. And he has you can get certified in some of his things too. You can join the Food Choices Academy and be a part of his movement, our movement, everybody's movement. So that you can do too.
All right. Well, thank you, Linda. Very, very kind and very good job with all that at the beginning. Ronnie, thanks so much. I'd like to thank both of you for all the work you're doing with this planet, for the special event. Very much needed and appreciated. So, hello everyone. Finally, huh? Thank you for all taking the time to tune in today. It's certainly an honor for me to be here. So let's begin, shall we? Many of us have had a difficult time over the past few years. My wife and I lost our wonderful son Ty to a very aggressive brain tumor, and so I had to step away 5 years ago from my duties to save our planet in order to help try to save our son. It was all quite terribly sad, but we must go on. And of course, our hearts and prayers need to continue going out to those in Ukraine where their lives have been drastically changed forever unnecessarily. Knowing and doing. A snapshot of our planet today reveals this. We're running out of land and fresh water. Pollution and human-induced greenhouse gas emissions are threatening our atmosphere and waterways and negatively affecting our climate. Our oceans and sea life are being destroyed. We're losing habitat, ecosystems, and biodiversity with mass extinctions that are occurring at a rate that we haven't seen since the dinosaurs were lost 65 million years ago. More than 900 million people in the world are suffering from hunger. 1/2 of our topsoil has been lost, with some regions becoming completely desertified. All this while we witness escalating rates of emerging and chronic disease regarding our own human health. There's some scientists who predict that time's running out for us as a thriving species. We may only have 50 to maybe 100 years left before things become quite unraveled and quite bleak. Now, these are researchers, they're not doomsdayers. I call all this global depletion, the loss of our primary resources on Earth, as well as our own health. It's still about sustainability. I just think we need to hear it in a different direction, and we need to hear the whole story through an unfiltered lens. And for me, the story is constantly changing from one of needing to simply increase awareness to one of stopping now an aggressive cancer that's quickly consuming all of us. Well, these are just some of the timelines confronting us. For instance, phosphorus and nitrogen balance is irreversibly altered today. Oceanic warming is predicted to continue with rising seas for centuries from now, even if we stop all greenhouse gases from all fossil fuel use today. 240 million acres of tropical rainforest will be destroyed by the year 2030 and mostly replaced by livestock and crops to feed them. Well, we have 6 recognized categories of generations of humans living right now. The younger Z and Alpha generations are over there at the right. The millennials, who have the highest population, are in the middle. And over the far left, we have the greatest generation. And we have a daunting task in front of us today, I think, regarding this environment issue, to first realize that we're damaging our planet, and to what extent. That's kind of what Linda and I were just talking about. And then how to somehow fix it. Well, when I step back and look at this, I see a picture of tremendous responsibility, opportunity of profound historical magnitude. Although even children can certainly be leaders on behalf of our planet, it's really my generation and the generation of our adult children, those 3 or 4 generations in the middle here on the screen, that are in the strongest leadership position today. But we're in a unique situation to save Earth as we know it, and save life on it now, and allow a livable future for those coming after us. Or we could ignore things, act like nothing's happening, or hey, when we get around to it, and allow it to continue on its current path to possibly be destroyed. Well, what's at stake here? The extinction of our own species and thousands of other species. I mean, that could be at stake. We can essentially make or break humanity. And if you think this is an overstatement, an exaggeration, or that this problem is entirely related to climate change, well, then that doubt, that skepticism, and lack of full awareness and lack of action all become part of the problem. So certainly something needs to change. What is it that we're doing to our environment? What needs to change? And importantly, how fast does this change need to take place? The answers to those questions are pretty easy, I think. We need to stop those practices and habits that we administer every single day on a collective basis globally that create an unnecessary and proportionally large resource footprint, beginning with the largest footprint of all: food, what we eat, and our agricultural systems. It's a larger resource guzzler than anything else we do. It also happens to be the easiest to change. How quickly do we need to change our habits, our footprint? Well, I can tell you that it's not a time for baby steps. It needs to be done right now. It needs to be done today. We're on very real timelines, and it's much worse now than it was 5 years ago when I last made this call to action for everyone. Now, let's take a closer look at all this and kind of see what it means. Many of the choices you make in life will actually have a profound impact on something else in the world, especially with things you consume like food. It's one of the major disconnects we seem to live with. What you do here might affect, something over there. How to look outside the microcosm or the bubble that each of us tends to live in, and then how to encourage others to do the same. But we humans have reached a critical and fragile point in our evolutionary journey as a species. Just in the past 100 years, a blink of an eye, really, we've reached the Anthropocene era, where we've acquired the power to negatively change our biosphere and geosphere, the cryo, hydro, and atmosphere. We're ruining the very environs that sustain us and all other life on Earth. Unfortunately, we haven't acquired the wisdom or the maturity to be able to manage this power in a sensible or beneficial manner. In fact, 6 out of 9 identified tipping points or planetary boundaries related to our life support systems on Earth. 6 out of 9 have already been passed. And all 9 boundaries are interconnected. As one collapses, the others will soon follow. Crossing these boundaries will generate abrupt and irreversible damage to the environment and create risks for continued human existence. And yet, if we live within these boundaries, it'll allow us to live and thrive. Once again, 6 out of 9 boundaries have already been crossed. And with the other 3 boundaries, we're exceeding their tolerance levels. The boundaries that we've crossed are with loss of biosphere integrity and extinctions, land use change, already gone, altered biogeochemical flows, such as with phosphorus and nitrogen that we mentioned, climate change, accumulation of novel entities, which are microplastics, nanomaterials, and chemical pollution. And the 6th boundary crosses ocean acidification. Now, I think this is a little too complicated for most people to either quickly grasp or quickly be able to easily convey it to other people. So I simply call all this global depletion, which is what I've been calling it for the past 20, 25 years. The story for me always begins with these 2 numbers. They're just under 8 billion people living on our planet today, with 200,000 net added every single day. So control of the growth of our population could be an issue, but it's not nearly the problem as the number on the right, what we're doing to the planet. The number on the right represents the fact that there are more than 80 billion animals living on our planet that we raise and eat for food each year. And it repeats itself year after year in growing numbers. And this is the problem. In fact, this 80 billion number is quite impossible to pin down. And it's very much on the light side because these figures do not include up to 1.7 trillion chickens in the world, or the 2 trillion fish in the world that were slaughtered during that same year. Let's look at a graphic about global depletion. Certainly there are other industries that contribute to this picture, but none have the comprehensive impact as animal agriculture. Simply put, we're in overshoot mode, demanding more of our planet's resources than what it can supply. We've been in overshoot mode since 1973. Globally, it would take 2 full Earths to sustain what we're currently taking from and doing to our planet. Here in the United States, it would require 5 full Earths to support our current lifestyle. It's serious enough on its own merit, but it's made much more so because of the layers of various influences that tend to bury the problem and bury its solutions. But what's critical for everyone to understand is that it is not just an industrial or factory farm issue, not at all. It's a raising animals to eat issue, and we're going to see that as we go along today. So let's continue refining our thoughts on global warming or climate change. First, we need to remember that global warming and climate change, well, that's just one component of the much larger, more insidious problem of global depletion. The more total effect we have on our planet, it's not all caused by the energy sector. Discussions regarding global warming and climate change have now taken front stage nearly everywhere, which is a good thing. It must be remembered, though, again, that climate change will have the effects of exacerbation. It takes events and makes matters worse. Global warming and climate change, for instance, will not be the initial cause of these categories of global depletion that you see on the screen. We cause these things. Climate change then will make them worse. Well, these climate change reports were released recently. The IPCC report just a few months ago, documenting the work of over 450 scientists. The reports are gloomy at best. We're breaking a number of records we shouldn't be so proud of, finding that last year was the 5th warmest on record, despite being cooled most of the year by La Nina. And from 2013 through this year, where they rank as the 10 warmest years on record. Global temperatures now reached 1.2 degrees Celsius rise above pre-industrial times, a new record. Concentration of greenhouse gas emissions in our atmosphere reached 420 parts per million, a new record. Oceans are now rising over 4 millimeters per year, having risen faster and becoming warmer and more acidic than ever in recorded history. In fact, the oceans are becoming more acidic at a faster rate than ever seen in the past 56 million years. Many of us understand that climate change is real. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, we didn't understand that so well, but now most people understand it's real. You understand and appreciate the implications of unabated global warming and that we humans play an important role in becoming resilient and adapting to it. But instead of just becoming resilient to climate change or adapting to it, I would suggest we all understand some simple, unfiltered basics of what really causes climate change, how to most easily and effectively solve the problem, and what realistic timelines we're confronted with. And then perhaps we could even reverse it. The basics look like this. Our planet is warming in an accelerated fashion, which then causes our climate to change. The more it warms, the more drastic our climate and temperatures and weather patterns will be. Well, most of us know this. But this global warming is due to excessive greenhouse gases that are produced on Earth. Some are from natural causes, such as volcanoes, wetlands, the tundra, our oceans, but our planet's always had a beautiful way of balancing those small amounts that have been produced historically by simply sequestering or drawing down these gases back into the land and oceans, except whenever this became drastically imbalanced, like millions of years ago, and then it caused mass extinctions. But significant greenhouse gas imbalance is happening again today. Until around 1750 to 1850, that's a time referred to as pre-industrial, the amount of greenhouse gas emissions produced naturally on Earth had always been around 17 to 29 gigatons per year. Since the 1850s, though, we humans, through our everyday actions and choices, and actually started before then, but since that time, as a marker, we've been producing about 2 times that much per year, around 39 to 64 gigatons per year. And our planet, because of this, has warmed to 1.2 degrees Celsius since the period of 1850 to 1900. So this excess greenhouse gas accumulation in our atmosphere is what's causing global warming. The 3 gases most associated with global warming are carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. Well, since carbon dioxide is the most prevalent emitted gas at just under 75%, and it's mostly caused by the burning of fossil fuels, gas, oil, coal, it's become the focal point, the center of attention. Let's go after carbon dioxide. But that's not the only gas we should be focused on. Today, at nearly 2,000 parts per billion, 3 times what it was in 1850, methane is responsible for 30% of the rise we've seen in global warming since the pre-industrial times. 60% of all methane emissions are from human activities, and livestock, animal agriculture, is responsible for nearly 1/2 of all human-induced methane emissions globally. Methane is 86 times more powerful than carbon dioxide as a warming agent over a 20-year time frame. In fact, at the point of initial emission, methane is 120 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. So to stop further climate change, we need to drop human-induced greenhouse gas emissions, not just carbon dioxide, but from all sources that were being emitted today. Drop it down to what, though? Most climate change experts today believe we need to cut emissions to 1/2 of what they were in 2020 by the year 2030, and to get to 0 net emissions by the year 2050. But others, including me, believe that that's too late. So the first step is to be clear on where most of the human produced greenhouse gases are coming from, what industries, what sectors are the largest emitters. Then there should be swift action to stop them from emitting. Then the second issue would be what happens to all that extra CO2 that's left in the atmosphere and likely to be there for the next few hundreds of years. So let's first attack those large emitters. Who are they? Well, these numbers tried to answer that question, and when they were first published, started a bit of controversy. How could the meat everyone's eating cause more greenhouse gas emissions than what's caused by powering all the cars, trucks, planes, and trains that we drive and fly every day? But instead of 18%, as that original 2006 United Nations report stated, or even their most recent figure, 14.5%, a couple of researchers found that livestock could produce as much as 51% of all human-induced greenhouse gas emissions. Now, most scientific organizations that are in the public eye are not on board with this figure yet, but there are a number of reasons for the differences of these numbers, low to high. Most important for me is the vast underreporting in that 2006 United Nations report, the use of inaccurate global warming potential for methane. They used 21 instead of 86 or 120. These reports also failed to factor in all the greenhouse gases emitted because of our demand to eat fish, fuel, refrigeration, processing, packaging, transportation, et cetera. And there's profound bias amongst the authors of those first reports who were well-known consultants for the livestock industry. And the bias continues today with documents such as this. And with all these authors having very deep ties to the meat and dairy industries. These lower numbers of 18% and 14.5% also didn't properly factor in land use optimization, or what's referred to as carbon opportunity costs. How land might be used more carbon and methane efficiently. Well, with these costs positioned into the equation, many could argue that animal agriculture is indeed responsible for minimally between 37 and 51%. In fact, my good colleague, Dr. Silas Rao, who's speaking today, has recently eloquently proposed that animal agriculture may be responsible for 87% of all global human-induced greenhouse gas emissions, therefore the leading cause of climate change. Regardless of where the exact number resides, somewhere between the low figures and 51 or even 87%, with all factors considered, it's cause for alarm and immediate action. A perfect example of how all this information suppressed occurs every single year during our climate change conference. It's called the Conference of the Parties, or COP, held originally in Kyoto with its 1997 Kyoto Protocol. Last year was the 26th yearly conference. It was held in Glasgow, and this year actually be held after next week. It'll be in Egypt, where countries come together and they're trying to solve this global warming problem, but none of this that you see at the bottom is being addressed. The focus, once again, today is on fossil fuel, and specifically methane reduction by the year 2030, with no regard to livestock, even though, again, animal agriculture is the largest emitter of human-induced methane in the world. None of the goals of COP26 are being met right now. Many are, in fact, going in the wrong direction. So here's what I propose based on what the planet desperately needs regarding methane. And I'd suggest taking photos of many of these data prominent slides, because I'm going to be running through them pretty quickly. You can refer to them later and even ask questions, fire questions out to me after this is over, to my website or to Linda. Well, every aspect of global depletion has a timeline. It's not really a question of if we're going to run out of something, it's when at our current pace. And one of the most critical timelines of all is that of climate change we've been talking about. Climate scientists believe that we've already passed our timeline, because now it's more a matter of how to minimize the change in climate that we've set into motion and thereby minimize future damage. And it does appear dire when we view just how much greenhouse gas we've dumped into our atmosphere since 1850. CO2 levels had always been hovering around 277 parts per million for the past 10,000 years. That's the green line you see at the bottom of the screen. It represents 10,000 years. Then you look at what happened today. We're at 420 parts per million over on the right. So the first goal would be to drop our emissions so we're not contributing to this further. Then the second goal would be to get rid of all that extra CO2 that we've emitted. Otherwise, it just hangs around for hundreds of more years, causing more climate issues. So how do we do all that? Well, we could use some geoengineering and spray some material into our atmosphere to block the sun's rays, which would obviously cause a number of other problems, but that's being proposed. Or perhaps we could use some high technology and build machines that could extract the excess CO2 and bury it beneath the ground, like this company is starting to do in Iceland. But just one of these single units costs $15 million, and it would require it's projected to require nearly 100 million of these units worldwide to pull down the extra CO2 in our atmosphere. It would take then 75 to 100 years to simply scale up to produce this many units. So relying on this type of technological approach, it would cost us $1 quadrillion, whatever that is. It would take till the end of the century to be fully effective, and this won't address any other aspect of global depletion that we've been talking about. So I have another approach. And before I tell you about my approach, my plan, we need to take a quick look at our planet and how land is being used. Just a quick overview, 71% of our planet is tied up in our oceans. 29% is land. And we're going to focus on that. Of all of our land, 71% is considered habitable. The rest being desert and glaciers. 1/2 of this habitable land is used for agriculture, 1/2. 11% is considered unusable shrubland, and 1% is taken up by freshwater lakes and streams. So of all the land on Earth used for agriculture, which is a little over 5 billion hectares, that's about 20 million square miles, of all that land, almost 80% of that agricultural land is used for animal agriculture, land for grazing livestock and crops to feed them. Only 20% is used to grow plants for us to eat directly. But 82% of all the food calories eaten worldwide comes from that measly 20%. Please also pay particular attention to what I've just circled on the screen, to the fact that, which is the fact that only 1% of all habitable land on Earth is being used for urban development. That's right, only 1% is used for urban development. Certainly, we can't blame urbanization or urban sprawl as an excuse anymore for us running out of land. Again, the problem we have is not the number of people on Earth, it's what we're eating. So now on to my solution to climate change. Once again, out of all the land on Earth that's used for agriculture, 80% is used for grazing livestock and crops to feed them. It's a little over 4 billion hectares. Well, many researchers now agree with what I've been producing for the past maybe 25, 30 years, that we could grow enough food to feed the human population today and into the next 20 years on less than 1 billion hectares. Thus, we can stop all animal agriculture, remove all livestock from all grazing lands, and convert those 4 billion plus hectares back to forest by reforestation or just natural regeneration. In 2018, and inspired by the 1977 Green Belt movement, the World Wildlife Fund helped create Plant a Trillion Trees program, which then became an even larger movement called 1T, in the last couple of years. It's a wonderful idea on some levels, not so good on some other levels. The goal for this is for the world to plant 1 trillion trees by the year 2030. Sounds good, but nowhere in any of their mission statements is there mention or emphasis on food choice. Nowhere. Eliminating meat and dairy from one's diet, and yet that's the primary reason we need to plant trees, isn't it? We've been eating the wrong food all these years, and we had to cut down forests because we're running out of land to support this bizarre animal breeding and killing diet. Planting 1 trillion trees then initially sounds good, but it's essentially meaningless if the world continues to eat animals and animal products and thereby continues to deforest or misuse our resources while we're out running around planting trees. This movement also over-focuses, I think, on planting a certain number of trees rather than placing the focus on where it needs to be, again, which is to stop eating meat, stop deforesting, and then properly restoring all grazed and deforested land back to their near original state. For instance, if we restored the 4 billion hectares used for grazing livestock today with plant-based agroforestry, or simply by natural regeneration, just let it grow back, after 10 or 20 years, there would likely be nearly 2,000 trees growing per hectare, multiplied times 4 billion hectares, which would equal about 8 trillion trees, not 1 trillion. Again, it's the area, just reforest all those areas that are used by livestock. It doesn't matter how many trees it is, but it may be more like 8 times the 1 trillion. And this could potentially sequester and draw down between 108 and 181 gigatons of carbon equivalent greenhouse gases per year. It's quite amazing difference. And then there are mangroves. What are those? Well, these are critical coastal ecosystems that buffer communities against extreme weather events, such as Hurricane Ian that just happened. They're so very important. They slow down erosion. They foster so much wildlife and biodiversity. And next to peatlands, mangroves store more carbon than any other vegetation on Earth. Well, we've lost half of the world's mangroves just in the last 50 years. 32 million hectares. More than half of this terrible loss is due to aquaculture and shrimp farming. So let's stop eating fish and stop eating shrimp and begin reforesting the 32 million hectares of mangroves, which would then sequester another 4 gigatons of carbon equivalent greenhouse gases per year. So how important is food choice and climate change? We're currently pumping in, again, 64 gigatons of carbon equivalent greenhouse gases in our atmosphere each year. If we converted all global cropland that's currently growing crops to feed livestock and converted all pasture land with grazing livestock to plant-based agroforestry systems, producing food for us to eat and just letting it grow wildly, we'd find ourselves at a net negative greenhouse gas scenario, complete mitigation. All greenhouse gases currently being emitted by all sources today could be sequestered into the soil, and the excess carbon dioxide that we pumped in over the past 200 years could be pulled down. This would then bring back wildlife, biodiversity, protect our soil, calm weather patterns. This is where optimism about climate change can be found. And this is without factoring in all the carbon sequestration from restoring desertified regions, our peatlands, mangroves, and other blue carbon projects in our oceans. As a result of climate change, rising seas are already causing island countries to disappear. Kiribati, Maldives, most of which will likely be underwater by the year 2050, setting up mass migrations and loss of islands that have existed for thousands of years. Micronesia, Fiji, Solomon Islands, and many more are just a few examples of what are being lost in our lifetime due to our actions and then inactions. Now, why is this important? I think it's important because we need to understand that the devastating effects of climate change are disproportionate globally. Together, all these island countries combined are only responsible for less than 0.5% of human-induced global greenhouse gas emissions. This is the grave example of how the choices we make, particularly with food choice right here in the United States, will have a profound impact on some other living being elsewhere in the world. With every bite of an animal product, we are essentially taking a bite out of the life of these island countries and causing undue pain and suffering to those who live there. But again, we can change this with everything we eat. By 2050, just 27 years from now, 150 million people conservatively around the world will be displaced, losing their homes from rising seas and tides and setting up mass migrations inland. To summarize the connection between food choice and climate change, we have this then. Climate change is very real, it's worsening, and the situation's urgent since we've already passed the timeline. Raising animals for us to eat is one of the largest, if not the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, it's the most important industry to eliminate. And lastly, any food movement away from factory farms, but including grass-fed or pastured animal systems, will not solve the problem. In fact, it's going to make it worse. More land use changes, more deforestation, and a higher feed conversion ratio, and even more production of methane. Well, current studies show that on average, we waste around 30% of all food produced in the world. So reducing this waste is certainly important in our battle against climate change and loss of natural resources. However, we can reduce our food waste to zero and still be wasting massive amounts of resources and continue on a path that furthers irreversible climate change if the food we're eating has anything to do with animal agriculture. Well, interspersed throughout our discussions are a few themes. One theme is how information about this particular subject has been suppressed, even mismanaged, so much so that objectives of many important meetings like the climate change conferences and other organizations, well, their objectives aren't being met. And that all begins with the words we use. How clear are they? Are they conveying reality? These are all food movements that you see on the screen that superficially seem to make sense. They make you feel as if you're going in the right direction because, well, they're going away from factory farms. They're going away from processed foods. That's got to be a good thing, right? Maybe, maybe not. Do any of these words mean sustainable or healthy? Many would want you to think so. How about the word humane? Does humane equal sustainable or healthy for all involved? And if it does, which it doesn't, who is it that tries to define that word humane for all of us? Incredibly, there is one person that the USDA and every humane certified organization in the world relies on for that definition of humane. One person. I've covered this strange and unfortunate issue extensively in one of my books. So then, does humane even equal humane? Well, this is what happens to a humane raised chicken. And over 19,000 chickens are killed every minute, every 60 seconds in our country, 19,000. You know, buying local has little to do with sustainability other than from an economic standpoint. It's a very solid idea to help nearby farmers, and that's important. But in fact, transportation is only responsible for 4%. Just 4% of all the fossil fuels used and greenhouse gases emitted in the entire food production process. It's much more relevant to view this by using a complete life cycle analysis then. Well, the United Nations in 2019 designated the next 10 years as the decade of family farming, which is a good thing for the 500 million small family farmers in the world who produce over 80% of the world's food. But in terms of our health and the health of our environment, we must remember that it's the type of food that's being produced that matters most, not the size of the farm or the miles traveled. So by all means, support your local farmer markets, any one of the over 8,000 throughout the US, and support your local cooperatives. But it has to be plant-based in order to make good sense for our planet. And here's a new animal agricultural movement that's gaining momentum called climate smart. It's a nice thought, but given the global warming predicament we're in, shouldn't we be growing and eating only plant-based foods, which would then make this food movement, well, it would make it the climate smartest. And I mean, we all want to be smart, but who wouldn't want to be the smartest? The most recent food movement in the United States and Canada and Europe that's gaining considerable traction is this one, to eat less meat. And now it's being referred to or called a plant-forward diet, but it's basically the same goal of eating less meat. So let's see, the logic in this food movement is that if you recognize you're doing something that's wrong, unhealthy, and quite frankly, unnecessary, well, hey, just continue doing that wrong, unhealthy, unnecessary thing a few less times each day. Sure, that kind of makes sense. Despite what the United Nations and other gold standard organizations are promoting, this sustainability issue will not be solved by advocating eating less meat, because that approach is subjective, it's inconsistent with the magnitude and the urgency of the problem, and it perpetuates irresponsibility with every bite taken. Also, it mistakenly shifts the focus to sea animals or seafood, which, as we all know, is not really meat, right? Again, it all begins with the words we use. Are they conveying reality? The words food, meat, consumption, slaughter, protein shouldn't really be words we associate with animals. After all, we're animals. And we talk about this word protein and, of course, slaughtering issues frequently at our sanctuary in Michigan. Here, my faithful research assistants, I have many of them, they're looking over my notes and reminding me to put a good word in about turkeys. And often we talk about words and definitions on our daily walks. It's a topic that comes up frequently. Not sure which of these two little buddies want to be called protein, sitting on the porch here. Barney here is having a heart-to-heart discussion with Jill, my lovely wife, about this terminology problem. He doesn't want to like to be called protein. And here are a few others who would like to voice their opinion. And Solomon here is making sure again that I let everyone know just how kind, how smart, and how very clean pigs are. Got it, Solomon. And talking about words and definitions, Plato still wonders why we humans choose to call him protein or beef instead of, say, for instance, just calling him Plato, his name. And he's confused. And when talking about food choice, we often over-focus on farmed animals, don't we? Often over-focus on that, but we need to include all wild animals as well, large and small, insects, even insects, because wild animals are the ones who are rapidly losing habitat and are quickly disappearing from our planet due to our choice of foods. These are just some of the many who voiced their concern to me over the years about this problem. Lucy is seen here whispering over my shoulder, "What about me?" I need help too. It's not just about cows. No, it's not. One of the most pressing concerns that we have today regarding sustaining our life and future life on Earth is our supply of fresh water. From 1941 to 2011, the world's population tripled, but freshwater consumption quadrupled. In 2016, the World's Economic Forum ranked freshwater crisis as the top global risk to industry and society over the next decade, not climate change, which was number 2 on their list, but freshwater crisis, lack of availability. Failure to properly address climate change has now moved up to the number 1 concern this year for this forum, but that's not because freshwater crisis has improved. In fact, it's gotten worse. There's a growing gap between worldwide demand for water and what's really available. With so much demand, there's expected to be a 40% shortage in water supply in just the next 8 years. What you decide to eat has every single thing to do with this. Scientists are very concerned about water scarcity. But I think it's really more a matter of water management, isn't it? Yeah, instead of focusing on technologies, we should be first looking at choices. Is this a good choice? How about this choice? Does that look good? Are any of these good choices, do you think? They're all conservative global averages by the Water Footprint Network. Are these good choices as compared to, say, these choices? It's quite a difference, wouldn't you say? Hey, it requires 400 gallons of water just to slaughter 1 cow or 1 pig in the United States today, on average. Although water on Earth remains constant, the consumptive form it happens to be in does not. 4 out of 5 people now live within 30 miles of a water-damaged area, meaning soon to run out or polluted. More than 4 billion people experience severe water scarcity at least 1 month per year. There are nearly 300 transboundary river and waterways on Earth where multiple countries share vital running water supply. As we see water shortages over the next 8 years, we will surely see droughts, famine, human sickness, and then we're going to see conflicts, social unrest, and even wars. Indeed, those living downstream will be fiercely battling those living upstream for their water rights. It's already happening today. Climate change is making these matters worse, but will not cause them. Food choice and virtual water trading through food, especially with animal products, will play a much larger role than energy or fossil fuel use. In many areas of the world, freshwater scarcity coexists with hunger and poverty. Afghanistan, Sudan, and Saudi Arabia are raising livestock and crops to feed them while running their water supplies dry. 60% of Ethiopia's population suffers from hunger and thirst, and yet their dehydrated land is being used to support a growing herd of over 65 million cattle, the largest in Africa. Well, despite having an organization that's accomplished so many wonderful things in the world, Bill and Melinda Gates and their foundation should be frankly embarrassed about funding the proliferation of animal agriculture anywhere in the world, let alone here in dehydrated Ethiopia. And so it is for Mongolia, India, China, Portugal, nearly every country in the world struggling with an increasing human population, the effects of climate change, and dwindling resources, and being strangled by their meat and dairy culture. Well, this has to include then the country of California and most of our Southwest United States. In the past 22 years, as you know, the mega drought in the Southwest United States has become so severe that it's now the driest 2 decades in that region in at least the last 1,200 years. So shouldn't we be using our water more efficiently? Now, of course we should. Regarding this freshwater topic, things aren't going so well in California, but have you given thought to where most of the dwindling water supply is going? It's not going to golf courses. Most of it's not to lawn care. Between 60 and 70% of the total consumptive water usage in California goes to livestock and crops to feed them. You know, being concerned and mandating restrictions that include not watering lawns for 2 days after rain, or not using drinking water to clean sidewalks or wash cars, and with $500 per day fines for not complying, well, that won't solve California's problem. No, not at all. Governor Newsom's mandated a 15% cut in water use this past year, but that won't solve much either because California hasn't factored in the water footprint of what they're eating. As a vivid example, California uses 960,000 acres of land just to produce alfalfa. Well, why do you do that out there in California? Why do you do that? Because each one of those 960,000 acres of alfalfa requires 2 million gallons of water per year to irrigate, and they all get irrigated, every one of those acres. And guess where all that alfalfa goes? Well, we don't eat it. It goes to livestock, 5% to horses, the rest to livestock, 75% to dairy cows, and there's 2.5 million dairy cows just in California. Using less water to brush our teeth, flush toilets, do laundry, or less time in the shower will save, on average, 2 gallons of water per day for each act. That's important. However, eliminating meat and dairy entirely from one's diet will save, on average, over 2,600 gallons of water per person every single day. All right, well, if California stopped growing alfalfa for livestock, just stopped growing alfalfa for 1 year, just 1 year, the amount of water saved that 1 year would be enough to provide drinking water to the entire human population of the city of San Francisco. Not for 1 year, but every year for the next 12,500 years. That's hard to believe, but there you go. Take a picture. It's math doesn't lie, nor does where all the water is going in California. It doesn't lie. The average household in the United States uses 76,000 gallons of water in 1 year. That's according to the EPA. Indoor use, about 33,000 gallons outdoors. It's quite a bit of water, and it's what we're focused on in times of drought, how to reduce that. Well, the average person in the United States consumes 274 pounds of meat in 1 year, divided between 85 pounds of cow and 66 pounds of pig, 123 pounds of chicken and turkey, in addition to the 288 eggs and 655 pounds of dairy products, which equates to 956,000 gallons of water per person per year, just to support that animal product diet. So now a more accurate view that we should all be aware of, and that the EPA should be broadcasting, is that every household of 3 people in the United States, well, they use nearly 3 million gallons of water each year, not 76,000. The real amount is nearly 3 million gallons. And 96% of that outrageous water use is from their choice to eat animals. So whenever there's a drought or water shortage anywhere in the United States, which there is, and will continue to be, does the government or your community ever step up and declare a state of rationing or eliminating meat or dairy? Why not? Why shouldn't they? In terms of raw numbers, livestock consume 34 trillion gallons of fresh water each year in the United States alone, by way of drinking water and water to grow crops to feed them. 34 trillion gallons. So the question remains, even though we experience periods of less precipitation, is it the drought we should be concerned about in California and across the Southwest United States, Middle East, and elsewhere in the world? Or is it more of a problem of misuse of the freshwater supplies and resources that happen to be available at any particular point in time? How we use them, how we manage it. Maybe this is the way we should begin viewing this issue. So then these are the timelines for fresh water, and it's not anything that we should feel comfortable with. There are 3 principal ways our oceans are being destroyed, and all 3 are caused, or at least heavily affected, by our food choice. Raising and eating animals on land causes warming and acidification of our oceans, which is now thought to be irreversible in our lifetime. Surface runoff from livestock operations on land has caused more than 550 nitrogen-flooded dead zones around the world, comprising over 95,000 square miles of areas completely devoid of oxygen or life. So any meaningful discussion of the state of our oceans has to first begin with frank discussions about land-based animal agriculture. But it is fishing that has the largest impact of all on the species that live in the oceans. Incredibly large amounts of sea life are taken from our oceans in 3 ways. First, they're taken as target fish. That's the one you want to eat. Fish are also taken out of our oceans to feed other fish grown in factory fish farms, part of the aquaculture movement. And lastly, fish are taken as bykill due to the first two types of fishing. Well, gosh, that really doesn't leave too much in our oceans now, does it? In fact, our oceans are still being ravaged, and yet everyone we know eats fish. Fragile, interdependent, and poorly understood ecosystems have been devastated. Over 93 million tons of fish were caught last year, with quite a few more millions and millions of tons of bykill, which are all those other innocent sea life caught and killed and discarded in the process of trying to catch that targeted fish everyone's asking for. Bykill includes juvenile fish, and they'll never see their way to maturity. All 7 of the endangered sea turtles, sea lions, birds, dolphins, even whales are bykill. Drink here. Of the 17 major fishing stock areas in the world, all are either overexploited or on the verge of collapse. 89% of the world's fished species are affected, considered heavily depleted or overfished from overfishing practices. That's quite a bit of damage, but along comes this word sustainable to justify continued harvesting. I mean, how is that word even used in the fishing industry? I mean, who defines it, who monitors it? And with less than 3% of all of our oceans being regulated, that's right, less than 3% of all of our oceans are being regulated, then who decides on enforcement? Well, if you look at this carefully or even not so carefully, the real answer is no one. And I say real answer because now there's sea life and that's caught and labeled sustainable, and in fact, it's not. But it's still labeled as such by a number of highly respected organizations, such as the Marine Stewardship Council or MSC. The Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch, most of you are familiar with them, after 20 years of knowing about these problems, still had lobster from the Gulf of Maine and Canada listed as a good alternative until just last month. Lobster from Canada or Maine has never been a good alternative for many reasons. Rapidly declining number of lobster, inefficient trapping mechanisms, and most importantly, I think, is the sad effect lobster trapping has on the critically endangered North Atlantic right whale. There are only 340 now, 340, that's it, of these magnificent creatures left that we haven't killed. And nearly all of them, 83% of them, are getting entangled, injured, and killed in those darn trap lines. But it's not just lobster trap lines from Maine or Canada that cause all the problems behind the scenes, actually. It's fishing nets from all over the world. Whales caught in fishing nets die a very slow, painful, agonizing death while trying to desperately free themselves over a period of 6 months, 6 months time on average, from the time they first became entangled. It's 6 months. We owe these whales and lobsters much more than this, or this. Elsewhere in the world, there have been an estimated 800,000 tons of non-biodegradable fishing nets cut loose from fishing vessels each year for the past 25 years, catching countless numbers of unsuspecting sea life. An estimated 30% of all fishing nets and lines used globally are lost each year in our oceans. The indiscriminate use and discarding of plastics is certainly a problem everywhere on Earth, but nowhere is it more devastating to other life forms than in our oceans. Nearly 600 million pounds of plastic are now floating in our oceans, making it a massive pool of our waste. The largest of 5 plastic garbage zones in our oceans, called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, covers 620,000 square miles in an area of North Pacific between California and Hawaii. It's 3 times the size of France. And while we should indeed be concerned about plastic straws and bottles, we should also be concerned about fishing, because 46% of all the plastic found in this floating garbage country, 46% of all that plastic is from ghost nets from fishing. Only 1% is from plastic straws. When researchers and ocean conservation groups discuss the topic of overfishing, they typically point to the tons of wild fish caught per year, and they also raised from aquaculture, and they call this production. So I look at it much differently and more accurately by adding to these figures another 28 million tons of IUU, which is illegally caught, unregulated, unreported, which I don't even know how they come up with that number, and also bykill, which amounts to perhaps another 200 million tons of sea animals per year. So it's not accurate at all for researchers to call any of this production, because in reality, what we're doing is destroying. Fishing, of course, destroys species of target fish, but it also destroys ecosystems and biodiversity. All forms of fishing are destructive by definition because it kills something. Fishing also destroys habitat. So how effective is that sustainable seafood label? There are just so many examples of oceanic species that have collapsed while under the watch of our two largest certified sustainable organizations. Over 1,000 types of fish are affected right now today. And so it is with fishing under the sustainable label. Target fish are becoming extinct. We move on to the next fish in line, creating serial depletion, and then other sea life up and down the food web are becoming extinct. It's a cascade effect, all part of the collateral damage that begins with us. Coral reef systems around the world are in serious trouble. The Great Barrier Reef has lost more than half of its coral cover since 1985. Most would think that it's due to pollution and climate change. But the primary initial cause of coral reef death there and throughout most of the world is not from pollution, and it's not from climate change. It's from overfishing. An example in the other direction can be found in the Queens Islands off the southern coast of Cuba, where they haven't allowed any commercial fishing, and the coral reef ecosystems there look the same as they have for the past several thousands of years. Are coral reefs in serious danger from the effects of climate change? Sure. Yeah, they are among the most vulnerable of any ecosystems on Earth. But studies have shown, many studies have shown, that maintaining coral reefs as a no-take marine protected area, meaning no fishing allowed, and strictly enforced, it'll make coral reefs 6 times more resilient to the effects of global warming and climate change. One of the most important factors in balancing coral reef systems are predatory fish like sharks, but we're killing them too. Quite a few of them. 1/3 of all shark species are nearing extinction. We're killing well over 100 million sharks per year. Why? Why is that happening? Well, 70 to 100 million sharks have their fins cut off like this, and then they're thrown overboard to die so we can eat shark fin soup. It's terrible to see this, isn't it? And I know what you're thinking. You're saying to yourselves again, I don't eat shark fin soup, not me. And furthermore, it's banned in 14 states in the United States. Only 14 states. Isn't that great? But again, over 98% of us worldwide do eat fish. And by eating fish, any type of fish, we're doing this to 60 million sharks that are caught each year and killed in fishing nets and lines as bykill. So go ahead and ban shark fin soup all you want. But why would you stop there? If you're truly concerned about endangered sea turtles, whales, sharks, dolphins, and the state of our oceans, you should ban fishing. Well, many fisheries that are accepted and labeled as sustainable are actually viewed by many scientists as unsustainable today. Killing krill has now become a big business, but you don't need to eat krill or any other sea life to get your omega-3s, unless, of course, you listen to Dr. Oz, which you shouldn't do. However, krill is fundamental to the survival of almost every animal species in and around the Antarctic. Yet scientists admit to knowing very little about krill or the interconnected ecosystems heavily affected by krill, such as phytoplankton and algae in one direction, or all the species that feed on krill in the other direction. We're just learning about krill's importance in capturing carbon from the atmosphere. Yeah, krill can remove up to 12 gigatons per year in greenhouse gas emissions. Amazing. The numbers of most large species of fish have declined by over 90% of their original numbers. Bluefin tuna and swordfish species are less than 4% of the original historic numbers, still not protected by the Endangered Species Act, because while we'd rather eat them into extinction, instead of eating dolphin-free tuna, we should be concerned about eating simply tuna-free. This is an approved sustainable method of catching tuna, by the way, that you see. The most heavily killed fish in the world are anchovies at 10 million tons per year. Just that figure came just a year and a half ago. The most heavily killed larger fish species in the world is the Alaskan pollock, harvested at over 4 million tons per year. Both are still labeled as sustainable. Who would think you could take 10 million tons of any species from anywhere on Earth and think somehow they wouldn't be missed. This is a humpback whale trying to find some sardines to feed on. Here's the point regarding our oceans. It's no longer a topic or a problem of overfishing. That was a term that could be applied back in the early 1800s. Today, it's about fishing, any type of fishing. Well, not to worry, because now we have fish farms. Over 50% of all fish consumed worldwide are produced from aquaculture, which is growing faster than any other food sector. One reason for this tremendous growth is the very false illusion of environmentalism. 60% of all fish farms are land-based. Some are indoors, some are outside, like this one that I visited, where he's proudly showing me the protein they produce. Funny, it looks like a fish to me. He's got in his hands there. And regardless of where the fish on your plate comes from now or in the future, is the process of catching and slaughtering fish, is that process humane? And if it isn't humane, then why do we do it? So all of you have various sensory receptors associated with feeling pain. Many are called nociceptors. Most mammals have numerous polymodal nociceptors in and around their face, their head, their neck. Well, so do fish. Yeah, that's right. They can feel this. In reality, there's no such thing as sustainable commercial fishing. Especially if you apply the three factors of how that word sustainable is defined by the industry itself on the slide here. In reality, none of these factors exist for any fish labeled as sustainable. And please note the sobering statistic at the bottom of this slide. Over 200 million sea animals are extracted from our oceans every hour. So why can't we give our oceans a break? What's inhibiting us from providing complete rest for our oceans? Which is what they need and what's been shown to work historically in various settings around the world. We have lots of data to support this. Just leave our oceans alone. Is it only because of economics? Sure it is. Yeah, global subsidies for the fishing industry are now at $35 billion per year, which then supports economically the continued devastation of our oceans. Global revenues from fishing are at 150 billion US dollars per year, but only 7 billion of that is from deep sea fishing. Well, fish sequester, draw down greenhouse gases. Imagine that, not counting all the sea life, which is plenty in our reef systems. Recent studies have found that deep sea fish sequester up to 2 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions per year, which equates to $222 billion per year savings in costs in our efforts to battle global warming. That's what it would cost to take away 2 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a clear argument, isn't there, for banning fishing on the high seas and elsewhere, strictly from an economic standpoint. Fish are more valuable if left alone in our oceans as live climate change mitigating agents than as food on our plates. $222 billion versus $7 billion. Seems simple to me. With continued extraction, warming, acidification, and deoxygenation, our oceans that we once felt so robust will very soon be unable to support what few life forms remain in and around them. So the timelines for our oceans look like this. This is not science fiction. It's not something I just made up today. It's reality. And quite sadly, it's all happened on our watch. You're looking at what we've created and then are passing on to future generations. Our oceans provide 1/2 of the planet's oxygen. They absorb 20 to 30% of human-induced greenhouse gas emissions. They've absorbed 90% of the excess heat caused by global warming. And they're the nucleus of our complex food chain. So it's very true that when oceans die, we die. In the last 25 years, 10 times more rainforest has been lost due to raising livestock than what's been lost due to palm oil. So be concerned about palm oil, certainly, but then be 10 times more concerned about livestock and animal agriculture. Tropical rainforests cover 5 million square miles, house more than 1/2 the world's 10 million plus species of plants, animals, and insects, and many more millions undiscovered. The Amazon rainforest alone produces more than 20% of the world's supply of oxygen. And satellite analysis recently showed that 30 million acres of tropical rainforest were destroyed just last year alone. 30 million acres. In fact, 34% of Earth's tropical rainforests have already been cleared, destroyed. And an additional 30% have been degraded. So with deforestation, this is the sad result, the burning and bulldozing of rainforests. Soon grass, pasture, and cattle will follow this in. If you choose to eat livestock here in the United States or anywhere else in the world, you're supporting this destruction by fueling the global demand for meat. Between 70 and 80% of all rainforest loss in the Amazon is due to raising cattle. Another 10% lost due to growing crops to feed them and other livestock. And again, remember, these livestock are grazing. It's not a matter of factory farming, and regardless of the effects of climate change. By the year 2050, made less resilient, but not caused by climate change, most tropical rainforests will be gone. And the few patches that remain will have already been way past their tipping point, and we'll lose their vast amount of wildlife, indigenous tribes, vital climate support systems for the next few thousands of years, which is how long it took these rainforests to develop to their current state of evolution. And we've wiped them out in less than 50 years. Some scientists and United Nations policymakers predict that we only have 60 years left before we run out of topsoil. That's going to be interesting, because 1/3 to 1/2 of all Earth's topsoil has already been lost just in the past 150 years. Now, most of the world's agricultural land suffers from severe erosion. We need topsoil to grow food. At the beginning of this erosion and desertification equation is deforestation. And the majority of deforestation can be blamed squarely on animal agriculture. In fact, less than 2% of all crops grown worldwide today are with organic methods for direct human consumption. Soil is the Earth's fragile skin that supports all life on Earth. Within soil, you'll find countless species that create a very complex ecosystem. Animal agriculture is the single largest contributor to soil damage and loss by way of converting forests and natural grasslands to farm fields and pastures. Just one small teaspoon of soil will contain more living organisms than we have people in the world. 1 teaspoon. Soil is at the center of the United Nations sustainability efforts because food security, water scarcity, biodiversity loss, and human health threats are closely linked and dependent upon soil biodiversity. But nowhere on this poster of theirs, or in their efforts about their prescribed solutions that are shown here in the root system and on this poster, those are solutions. Nowhere in there or anywhere else in their documents can be found mention about the #1 cause of soil erosion and degradation, which is animal agriculture. So why wouldn't their #1 solution be to stop eating animals? It's not mentioned anywhere. This is how much land is being used to raise livestock today, 40% of the entire ice-free terrestrial landmass on Earth. If we factor in the 230 million acres of public lands used for grazing livestock, they account for, or livestock in general, account for 90% of all land used for agriculture in the United States. The reason animal agriculture creates so many sustainability problems is quite simple. It's terribly inefficient, and it wastes resources, energy, and lives. You can produce 15 times more protein from plants as you can from animals on any given area of land. Meat and dairy products require up to 100 times more water than plant-based foods, a fraction of the fossil fuel use, and plants sequester greenhouse gases rather than causing them. Well, this statistic needed to be updated, so I did it. Livestock now produce 11 million pounds of urine and feces every 60 seconds in our country. 11 million pounds, which is 100 times more than the entire human population produces. 950 million people are suffering from hunger worldwide, with a child dying from hunger every 10 seconds. To be sure, world hunger has many layers of complexity. One of the larger reasons is tied to poverty, but another significant factor is the looming shadow of our current demand to eat livestock and fish, which is indirectly tied to poverty. In fact, eating these animals ultimately affects food prices, food availability, and policymaking, which then suppresses progress in developing countries. Last year, there was considered another record harvest of grain in the world with over 3 billion tons produced. But nearly half of that was given to animals in the meat and dairy industries. Each year, 77% of all coarse grain produced in the world for food is consumed by livestock. That's corn, oats, sorghum, rye, millet, barley, etc. But we can't blame climate change, droughts, or flooding for the world's food security issues, although they will be modifying factors. Clearly, the difficulty is not how or if we can produce enough food to feed the hungry or the growing global population, but rather where all the food we currently produce globally is going. Solving world hunger is not as simple as giving them the grain that would normally go to livestock. I found that it's not that easy. The solution, particularly in developing countries that I've written about over the years, requires a multi-dimensional approach to sustainability, establishing it on many levels simultaneously, with organic plant-based food systems at the very nucleus. The model for success at reducing hunger in developing countries, I believe, should look like this. No livestock anywhere in the picture. This is the model where all world hunger funding should be spent if it is to be considered responsible financing. We're losing other species on Earth at an unprecedented rate. Plants, animals. The current view of most scientists is more related to the rate of extinction now rather than the exact number, because they simply can't keep up with all the extinctions. That we're losing anywhere between 1,000 to 10,000 times the background rate, which we've seen it be for the previous 10 million years, which used to be about two to four species going extinct per year. Now, regardless of the metric, it's now a massive and embarrassing amount. So why all the extinctions, and what are we doing about it? Recognizing there's a serious problem, and as part of the Convention on Biological Diversity held in 2010, 200 nations adopted a 10-year plan to save other species by the year 2020. These are just 4 of those 20 targets that were agreed upon that you can see on the screen. Unfortunately, none of the primary targets were met, none of them. And worse, loss of biodiversity is actually accelerating. And by the way, these are the recognized 5 drivers of biodiversity loss that you see on the screen. If you see a common denominator, well, nearly all researchers agree today that climate change is not the first or even the second most significant driver of biodiversity loss. They all agree that the leading cause of all 5 of these drivers combined is animal agriculture, livestock on land, and fishing in our oceans. It's pretty easy to meet their goal, for instance, of reducing overfishing. Just stop eating fish. Done. Problem solved. With failure of their targets set in 2010 at their meeting in Nagoya, and again with their meeting in 2020 in Aichi, last year the Convention on Biological Diversity announced a whole new set of goals. And once again, there is no direct mention of a plan to eliminate the major driver of biodiversity loss through all influencing factors, which is the meat, dairy, and fishing industries. No direct mention. Their 21 targets they established now will very predictably not be met again. Once again, climate change plays the role of an exacerbator. It doesn't cause this, but worsens this whole category of global depletion. The Living Planet Index shows that we lost more than half of all vertebrate animal species in the world since 1970. Half are gone. It's no surprise that during that same 50-year period of time, global production of meat and dairy products quadrupled. A landmark study was published just a couple of years ago in 2019, the most comprehensive ever regarding the state of our ecosystems. And among other things, they predicted that 1 million plant and animal species are going to be at risk of extinction just in the next few decades. That's 1 million. Essentially, 30 to 50% of all living species on Earth today will be extinct or heading towards extinction by the year 2050. Well, what we are doing to other forms of life on Earth is really unparalleled in the history of our planet, where one species, us, is causing the mass extinction of nearly all other species. So how do we solve all of these issues of global depletion? Again, I would recommend taking photos of these slides. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, and it's pretty important to use them and come back to them later. Knowing and doing. Over the years, I've been proposing two categories of solutions. First, there needs to be widespread, sweeping education of the public and those with a platform of influence. We essentially need to educate the educated and reach a higher level of consciousness. And second, we need to implement initiatives based on that education, such as creating policies which open the doors for businesses and help new and young farmers and help transition existing farms from animal agriculture to plant-based systems, and to transition those in the fishing industry to plant-based businesses. Beginning with the reallocation of the $770 billion per year that we spend globally subsidizing the meat, dairy, and fishing industries. This money could be spent more wisely and effectively for education and then transitioning purposes. So here are the land-based jobs that I think could be easily created and how they could be funded. Another time for a quick picture. And these are the ocean blue carbon and waterway jobs I think could be easily created. In all, nearly 200 million new and transition jobs could be easily created globally that could potentially add another nearly $4 trillion in revenue by the year 2030. This helps answer the question, of course, then, doesn't it? But Dr. Oppenlander, what do we do with the 39 million people who fish in the world if we ban fishing? Well, there you go. And likewise, same response for those involved with livestock on land. There's a way to do it. And for those who still think that eating any animal is sustainable, then it's time to introduce this concept or reinforce this concept: optimal relative sustainability. That'll work. How sustainable is it to raise and eat any animal product in a relative sense as compared to plant-based foods? How can we best use our resources? What foods will have the very least effect on climate change, and which foods best promote our own human health? Which are the most compassionate? All wrapped up into one package. This is the way we need to start viewing things in a relative sense as to then how to achieve optimal sustainability. In the future, we will be hearing more and more about these topics, all part of the better meat movement, which simply impedes our evolution toward plant-based systems. What does better meat actually mean? Well, I found that this concept of better meat falls in two broad categories. The first is grass-fed, pastured, or humane raised, which really isn't humane raised, beef, chicken, pork, turkey, or fish from aquaculture settings. The second category is meat raised in a laboratory, which is becoming a larger industry in the world. The only people who think this is better meat, though, are those who are blinded by producing it or eating it. Regarding the second category, which is meat produced from animal stem cells in the laboratory, it's also called cultured meat. There are over 70 companies worldwide now that are developing laboratory meat, including one funded by Bill Gates. And there are a couple of things that are very clear. Although meat produced in the lab has some, but not all, the humane aspects worked out. For instance, they still use fetal bovine serum for their medium, blood from a dead calf. It will require, it's predicted, about 10 to 30 years for this to be brought up to scale. Just one facility with bioreactors for laboratory meat will cost about $450 million, and it would be only able to produce less than 1/50th of 1% as much meat that's currently being consumed by the US population alone. And from a human health standpoint, laboratory meat is sketchy at best. For example, many of the components of animal products that degrade our own human health that we're all aware of, such as those seen on the slide here, well, those components are still present in both grass-fed meat and cultured laboratory meat. And both types of meat, grass-fed and laboratory meat, will have these disease-promoting issues as well. Not much better about that. Lastly, this is what Josh Tetrick recently said in summary of the laboratory meat industry's objectives. So I think it's good to review this. He's the CEO of Eat Just, who has raised over $1 billion for his company to ramp up laboratory meat production globally. It's real meat, Tetrick says. And instead of needing billions of animals and all the land and all the water and all the rainforest you typically need to knock down to make that happen, we start with a cell. Now we don't need the animals anymore. Well, since before our Neanderthal days, we actually never needed animals to eat. I'm not sure where Josh has been all these years. And keep in mind that his and Bill Gates' laboratory meat approach and all the others of those 70 companies, well, that meat approach has minimally 10 times the carbon footprint of plant-based meat alternatives. Then, of course, we have to deal with this ridiculous falsehood. Since we don't have another 2 or 3 hours to expound on this topic, I can offer you these sources to bolster your understanding about this argument. I've covered this pretty well in my second book, Food Choice and Sustainability. This line of argument, though, is becoming the latest buzz, so we need to talk about it. Savory calls it holistic management, but it's essentially another term for grass-fed or pastured livestock systems, just like all the others that you see on this list, all of which equate to continued loss of natural resources, suboptimal human health, and unnecessary slaughtering when any animal is entered into the equation. Founded in 2014 and based off of a best-selling book, Paul Hawken developed a wide-ranging, well-funded, and influential project called Drawdown. But their focus is entirely on climate change, and they broadly advocate grass-fed livestock as the centerpiece of the future of all food production. So the results of all their efforts will be very limited in scope and basically going backwards. Let me take a little break here. Drink here. And a movement called regenerative agriculture essentially repeats all the rest of what these methods are saying, that we need to eat animals and that hooved animals such as domesticated cows are necessary for humans to survive. So on its surface, regenerative agriculture sounds as if it's a one-stop solution to all of our environmental food choice issues. However, these livestock-driven techniques create a higher carbon footprint than actually factory farmed methods. So their argument is nonsensical because 1 acre of land will sequester up to 100 times more CO2 from our atmosphere than if livestock were left grazing in a regenerative agricultural manner. In fact, a recent Harvard study revealed that converting all cattle operations in the U.S. to managed grass-fed systems would conservatively require 30% more cattle than what we currently have today, and would create about 43% increase in methane emissions than with feed lot raised cows. So drink here. In summary fashion, meat that's produced from grass-fed pastured livestock systems, regardless of what it happens to be called, is actually less sustainable than conventional grain-fed or factory farm meat, which is, of course, much less sustainable than plants for us to eat. As we run out of land and water, this metric will become quite important. How much feed does it take to produce 1 pound of meat? The feed conversion ratio can be up to 70-to-1 for grazing systems. And please note the ratio for plant-based foods at the bottom of this slide, which flips the ratios. I've often pointed out that grass-fed livestock use more water than grain-fed. Yes, that's a fact, and here's the data to prove it, which takes into account all sources of water, green, blue, gray. And then, of course, both types of livestock operations, grass or factory-fed, use 50 to 100 times more water than growing plants for us to eat directly. What does eating less meat really mean? Just in the 1 hour I've been speaking here today, just in a little over 1 hour, over 9 million animals were slaughtered for us to eat in that 1 hour. 114,000 tons of grain were fed the livestock we're raising. But during that same 1 hour, 354 children in the world have died from starvation. Over 3,000 acres of tropical rainforest were destroyed and replaced by cattle. And over 3 million tons of greenhouse gases have been dumped into our atmosphere by livestock. Therefore, I'm always advocating a different approach than what the United Nations and others suggest when they state that we should eat less meat, because with that approach of eating less meat or plant forward, well, only 8 million animals will be slaughtered in the next hour, and only 113,000 tons of grain will be wasted, leaving only 353 children in the world that'll starve to death in that 1 hour. Isn't that what less means? So unlike Mark Bittman and Michael Pollan and United Nations and all other eat less meat, plant forward advocates, I think these numbers should be zero. I do. And it's easily attainable. There's no magic involved. Nothing has to be invented. No new technologies have to be employed. It's simply with what we choose to eat. And no children have to die from starvation. It seems that we continue floating around in a zone that I call pseudo-sustainability. That's exactly where we are today, never getting to where we need to be, but thinking that we're sustainable. It's a very dangerous predicament to be in, to think you're something and getting somewhere, but you're really not. And one more important definition that needs refinement: ethics, the ethical consideration of what we choose to eat. The topic of conscious eating has always been about animal rights, animal welfare, hasn't it? The life and death of other living beings that we consume, how they're treated. Ethics has always been about this, but I think it's time to view conscious eating or ethics in a much different and a much larger context. Is it ethical, for instance, for any of us to eat food that causes the extinction of other species if we don't need to? Is it ethical for the vast majority of humans on Earth to cause or contribute heavily to irreversible climate change, loss of ecosystems, and resource depletion, while 2% of us are living our lives by way of food choice to protect Earth? Is it ethical for any of us to use our planet in a way that exacerbates world hunger and diminishes the potential for future generations to survive? It also then becomes a matter of social justice. The person sitting next to you, who's eating steak, pork, chicken, cheese, eggs, fish, well, they're taking away resources that could be spread more evenly, more efficiently, and used to support the life of perhaps 20 or more people. Is it even ethical for 325 million Americans to impose their diet-related healthcare costs on the 10 million who choose to eat the right food? So you see, it's time we rethink ethics. It needs to be framed much differently than just with animal rights. In fact, I titled a chapter in one of my books, "Why Should I Pay for What Everyone Else Decides to Eat?" So it makes little sense to continue doing what our predecessors did in the late 1800s and early 1900s when we didn't know any better. And there were far less mouths to feed, with more water and land to do so. Do any of you still use a typewriter or a feather quill pen to write a message? How about the Pony Express or the Stagecoach to send those messages, or to travel and you thought the internet was slow? And what about candles or kerosene lamps to read with at night? Anybody out there still using kerosene lamps to read all my books with at night? Well, why not? Why aren't you using these things? I'll tell you why. Because they're obsolete. That's why. We've outgrown them. They're inefficient. They don't fit. And so it is with all meat, dairy, and fish. The world on a global basis can no longer support the production of these things. Just like the typewriter, just like the Stagecoach, we need to evolve past them, and we need to do it today because the clock is ticking. In the year 2000, the United Nations established 8 Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs. And these are important. These are quantifiable goals to be achieved by the year 2015 that addressed important issues like world poverty, disease, gender equality, hunger, even environmental sustainability. Obviously, the goals failed because all of these issues still exist and are even greater problems today than they were 22 years ago. Even though they were reconfigured in 2015 by the United Nations, these goals of the United Nations, now called SDGs, they still don't properly address the core problem of human rights. Never accurately defined what environmental sustainability is. They never heard one of my lectures. They never defined what it was or supposed to mean or how to achieve it, because they never properly position food choice or animal agriculture into their efforts. Human rights and environmental sustainability and food choice are deeply interconnected. And so for many reasons, the task to get everyone on track may seem daunting today. But there are wonderful films like this one and events like this one, but there are films like what you see on the screen here that are out to help matters. The Game Changers, produced by my good friends Jim and Susie Cameron, who are working quite diligently behind the scenes to inform and revitalize the world. And then there's Food Choices, a beautifully crafted film by my good friend Michał Seversky. And of course, there's Cowspiracy, that was so artfully done by my good friends and colleagues Kip and Keegan. And then the most recent Seaspiracy, written film produced by my good colleagues Ali and Lucy Chabrizi, which brings our oceans and fishing into clear focus. Well, I was very fortunate to be the lead consultant for a few of these films, and would highly recommend that all of you guide everyone around you to become more aware, to watch these films as they really hit the mark on all levels. And in terms of increasing awareness, you can't be more efficient with introducing others to the problems that we're immersed in and the easiest solutions. So when someone asks what they can do to help matters, watch those films, come to events like this one that Linda's put together so well. Spread the word. Many have asked me what they can do to help create positive change in the world regarding this environment issue. These that you see on the screen here are good starting points. The choices we make together, particularly with things we consume, such as food, dictates supply and therefore directs the use of our resources. It's not the industrial meat producer or the dairy factory farmer that'll take down the last standing rainforest on Earth. No. And it won't be the large commercial fishing trawler that's responsible for catching that last poor single fish remaining in the sea. It'll be the human consumer who's demanding it. So it seems as if the door has been opened a little bit, hasn't it? As far as I'm concerned, the global stage for massive food choice change has been set. If there's an imminent threat to our planet and to us, which there is, well, we should certainly be able to call for its elimination and for it to be done immediately. When we talk about definitions, then it's time to finish reshaping the word sustainable. This is my definition. And if you think about it, we really don't want to create a world that simply allows for our existence, our survival, or to be merely sustained. No, that's not good enough. At this stage, we need to create a world where there's quick regeneration, rapid rejuvenation, a world where we and other species together can flourish. That's my vision. And we are the unique group of generations living right now that can make or break this opportunity. It'll be our defining ethos, our legacy by which future generations will remember us. So I encourage and challenge everyone to become more aware about your food choices. Seek more accurate definitions. Understand the timelines that we are faced with, and then let's all commit to making a difference, but not just with our own health or our own life. No, let's commit to making a difference in someone else's life and a difference in the long-term health of our planet. But let's do it now, not later. We might not have a later. And let's think about making a difference every day of the week, not just on Mondays or Fridays. Be a superhero for those around you, guiding them and saving lives every single day. That, my friends, is what sustainability and positive change to achieve it is really all about. So with that in mind, let's all of us here today, or watching this in the future, let's all of us please go out and inspire others to become aware and then to act, knowing and doing. Thank you so very much. It's been a real honor for me to be here today, despite the technological challenges at the beginning. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Richard, so much. Thank you, Richard, so much for your doing this despite all the technical issues. I appreciate you so much, and your work is so invaluable. Thank you for spreading this message. We need to get it out there. You are a wonderful, wonderful human being with all the impeccable research you've done. And it's a little depressing, to be honest, but I know too much now, but I know I have to keep fighting like you do too.
Well, remember, Linda, the goal wasn't to depress, it was to provide data to display and I understand exactly what you mean. to display, really to back and support
Yeah.
really where we are, but also provide the fact that we have a way to get out of this.
Yeah,
we have
do.
a way to get out of this.
Yeah, we
So
do.
thank you
And
so
I
much,
got that
Linda.
message. You're so welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Bye, Richard.
bye-bye.